David was a 16-year-old boy who lived in a small village. His family was poor, and they struggled to buy food and clothes. Every day, David worked at a tiny shop to help his parents. He carried heavy bags and sold goods to the villagers. David had a big dream. He wanted to live in the city and earn lots of money. He wanted to help his family and build a better life. But David had one big problem: he could not speak English. In his village, no one spoke English. When tourists or city people visited, David felt shy and scared. He didn't know how to talk to them. Some people laughed at his broken English, and it made him feel sad. One day, David looked at the sky and thought, how can I change my life? How can I make my dream come true? Just then, a kind traveler named Mr. Harris came to the shop. He spoke English fluently. David admired him but felt nervous. Mr. Harris noticed David's effort and smiled. "Do you want to learn English, young man?" asked Mr. Harris. David nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. But I don't know where to start." Mr. Harris pulled a small book from his bag. It was a simple English learning guide. He handed it to David and said, "Here, take this. If you work hard, this book will help you." David held the book tightly. He felt hope for the first time. Maybe I can do it, he thought. That night, David sat by a small candle and opened the book. He decided that this was the first step toward changing his life. Every night after work, David opened the small English book that Mr. Harris had given him. He read the words slowly, trying to understand them. Some words were difficult, but David didn't give up. One day, while David was working at the shop, he heard a familiar voice. It was Mr. Harris. He had returned to the village. "Hello, young man," Mr. Harris greeted with a smile. David smiled back nervously. "Hello, sir. How are you?" he said in slow, careful English. Mr. Harris was surprised and happy. "You're learning. That's wonderful," he said. David felt proud. "I learn every night," he replied. Mr. Harris sat down and began talking to David. He taught him how to say simple sentences, like, "How much is this?" and "Where is the shop?" David repeated the sentences again and again until he got them right. Before leaving, Mr. Harris said, "David, you have a strong heart. If you keep practicing, you will be successful." After Mr. Harris left, David felt even more motivated. He practiced speaking English to himself in the mirror. He said simple sentences while walking to work. A few weeks later, some tourists came to the shop. David was nervous, but he remembered Mr. Harris's advice. "Hello. How can I help you?" David asked in English. The tourists smiled. They asked for water and snacks, and David tried his best to understand them. When they left, one tourist said, "Your English is very good." David felt happy and confident. For the first time, he saw that learning English could help him connect with the world. That evening, David looked at the sky again and thought, "I can do this. I will work hard and make my dreams come true." David's journey to learn English was not easy. After long hours of work at the shop, he was often tired. But every night, he sat by the small candlelight with his English book. He repeated words and phrases, even when his eyes felt heavy. One day, his mother noticed him struggling. "David, you work so hard. Why do you study English every night?" she asked. David looked at her with determination. "Mama, if I learn English, I can get a better job. I can help our family. I don't want us to struggle forever." His mother smiled, proud of his dedication. "You are a brave boy, David. Keep going." At the shop, David practiced using new words with the villagers. But they didn't speak English, so they often laughed at him. "Why are you trying to speak English, David? You will never need it here," they said. David felt embarrassed, but he didn't stop. He remembered Mr. Harris's words, "You have a strong heart." One rainy evening, David's father came home with a small radio. It was old but still worked. David was excited because he had heard that the radio sometimes played programs in English. That night, David listened carefully to the radio. The announcer spoke too fast, but David caught a few words. He repeated them out loud: "Hello, good morning, welcome." Over time, David used the radio as a tool to improve. He learned how to say days of the week, numbers, and greetings. However, life was still tough. The shop didn't earn much money, and David often felt hungry while studying. But every time he wanted to give up, he reminded himself of his dream. One evening, as David practiced speaking alone, he imagined himself in the city. He saw himself working in a big office, speaking English with confidence. That dream gave him the strength to continue. One sunny morning, David was sweeping the floor at the shop when a group of tourists walked in. They looked around curiously, pointing at the shelves and whispering to each other. David's heart raced. He had been practicing English for weeks, but now it was time to use it. One of the tourists walked up to him and said, "Do you have water?" David took a deep breath and smiled. "Yes, we have water," he said slowly. He showed them the bottles of water on the shelf. The tourist smiled back and said, "Thank you." "How much is it?" David carefully replied, "It is 50 rupees. The tourists nodded and paid. They bought some snacks too, and David managed to answer their simple questions. Although he made small mistakes, the tourists didn't mind. Before leaving, one of them said, "Your English is good. Keep learning." David felt a spark of pride. It was the first time someone praised his effort. He realized that his hard work was paying off. That evening, when David returned home, he told his family about the tourists. "I spoke English today," he said with a big smile. "They understood me." His mother clapped her hands in joy. "I'm so proud of you, David. This is just the beginning." David nodded. "Yes, Mama. I will learn more. One day, I will speak English fluently." The next day, David decided to add more words to his vocabulary. He wrote down the names of all the items in the shop in English. He practiced saying them out loud while working. The tourist's words stayed in his heart: "Your English is good. Keep learning." From that day on, David looked forward to every chance to use his English. He knew that each small step would bring him closer to his dream. David's confidence grew with every small success. But as he tried to learn more, the challenges became harder. One day, David heard about a job opening in the city at a small company. The job paid better than the shop, and David knew it could be his first step toward success. However, the requirement was clear: the applicant must speak basic English. David was nervous but decided to try. He prepared by practicing how to introduce himself. "My name is David. I am from a small village. I want to work in your company." On the day of the interview, David put on his best clothes, borrowed from a neighbor. He traveled to the city for the first time. The tall buildings and busy streets amazed him, but he stayed focused on his goal. At the company, David waited nervously in a small room with other applicants. When it was his turn, he walked into the office and greeted the manager. "Good morning, sir," he said with a shaky voice. The manager smiled. "Good morning. Please, tell me about yourself." David tried his best to answer in English, but he struggled to find the right words. "I work in shop. I learn English every night," he said. The manager listened patiently but looked uncertain. "Why should we hire you?" David paused. He wanted to explain his hard work and dedication, but his limited vocabulary held him back. "I work hard. I learn fast," he said simply. After the interview, David felt disappointed. He realized that his English was not strong enough for the job. He didn't get the position, but the experience taught him an important lesson: I need to learn more. When David returned home, he didn't feel defeated. Instead, he used the failure as motivation. "I will practice harder," he told himself. He started listening to English on the radio for longer hours and wrote sentences in a notebook. He even asked his younger sister to pretend to be an interviewer so he could practice. David understood that success wouldn't come easily. But he promised himself, "I will keep trying, no matter how many challenges I face." David's dedication caught the attention of someone unexpected. One evening, while practicing English outside the shop, a woman approached him. She was Ms. Laura, a retired school teacher who had recently moved to the village. "Hello, young man. I often see you talking to yourself in English," she said with a warm smile. "Are you learning on your own?" David nodded shyly. Yes, ma'am. I learn from book and radio. Ms. Laura looked impressed. That's wonderful. Would you like some help? David's eyes lit up. Yes, please, he said eagerly. From the next day, David began meeting Ms. Laura after work. She taught him how to form complete sentences, use correct grammar, and improve his pronunciation. She spoke slowly and encouraged him to ask questions. One evening, Ms. Laura gave him an important piece of advice. David, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are how we learn. Speak with confidence, even if it's not perfect. David took her words to heart. He started practicing with more energy. He wrote short essays, read them aloud, and corrected his errors. Ms. Laura taught him new phrases like, "How can I help you?" and "Could you repeat that, please?" One day, Ms. Laura brought a surprise, a small storybook in English. "Read this," she said. "It will help you understand how sentences flow." David struggled with the first few pages, but he kept trying. Each time he finished a chapter, he felt a sense of accomplishment. In a few weeks, David's English improved noticeably. He could hold short conversations and even write simple letters. Ms. Laura noticed his progress and said, "David, you are ready to take on new challenges. Remember, English is not just a language, it's a key to open many doors." David thanked Ms. Laura with a big smile. "You are my inspiration, ma'am. I will make you proud." With Ms. Laura's guidance, David felt stronger and more prepared. He knew that his journey was far from over, but he was no longer walking it alone. With his improved English skills and Ms. Laura's guidance, David felt ready to try again. One day, while helping a customer at the shop, he overheard them talking about a small hotel in the city that needed an assistant. David's heart raced. He asked the customer, "Excuse me, sir. What job is it?" The man replied, "They are looking for someone to help with tourists. Do you want to apply?" David nodded confidently. "Yes, sir." "Where is hotel?" The customer gave him directions, and David decided to take the chance. This time, he felt more prepared. He practiced introducing himself, answering questions, and asking for clarification, all skills he had learned with Ms. Laura. The next morning, David arrived at the hotel. It was a small, cozy place filled with foreign tourists. The manager, Mr. Patel, greeted him. "Good morning. Are you here for the job interview?" David took a deep breath and said, "Good morning, sir. Yes, I am here to apply for the assistant job." Mr. Patel smiled. "Tell me about yourself." David replied confidently, "My name is David. I am from a small village. I worked in a shop, and I have been learning English to help tourists." Mr. Patel was impressed by David's effort and determination. "Why do you want this job?" he asked. David answered, "I want to learn more, meet new people, and help my family. I work hard and learn quickly." After asking a few more questions, Mr. Patel said, "You have the spirit we are looking for. Your English is not perfect, but you're willing to improve. Welcome to the team, David." David's eyes filled with joy. "Thank you, sir. I will do my best." At the hotel, David's duties included greeting guests, helping them with their luggage, and answering simple questions in English. He made mistakes but quickly learned from them. The tourists loved David's enthusiasm. They often taught him new words and phrases, and he eagerly wrote them down in his notebook. In his first month, David earned more money than he ever had. He sent part of it home to his family and saved the rest for his future. David realized that this was just the beginning. "I am getting closer to my dream," he thought. As the weeks passed, David's confidence grew. His work at the hotel became easier, and he continued to improve his English. He no longer felt nervous when talking to tourists or answering questions. One afternoon, while working at the front desk, a tourist asked David for directions to a nearby park. David hesitated for a moment, but then he remembered something Ms. Laura had told him, "Don't be afraid to make mistakes." Taking a deep breath, David said, "Go straight, then turn left. Park is on your right." The tourist smiled and thanked him. David felt proud of himself. He was getting better at using English in real-life situations. Later that day, the hotel manager, Mr. Patel, called David into his office. "David, I've been watching your progress," Mr. Patel said. "You're doing an excellent job. I'd like to offer you a promotion." David's eyes widened. "Promotion?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," Mr. Patel said. "You've shown that you're dedicated and hardworking. We need someone to help with checking in guests and handling phone calls. Are you interested?" David's heart raced. He had been dreaming of a chance like this, but he knew it would require more English. He nodded and said, "Yes, sir. I will do my best." Mr. Patel smiled. "That's what I like to hear. I'm confident you'll succeed." In the following weeks, David began handling the check-in process and answering phone calls in English. He made some mistakes, but the guests were always patient with him. Each time he finished a task, David felt more confident. One evening, while reading an English book, David realized how far he had come. He thought back to the nervous boy who had struggled to speak simple sentences. Now, he was speaking English daily at work and handling more responsibilities. David looked at the sky and whispered to himself, "I can do this. I will keep improving. This is just the beginning." David's life continued to change, and with each passing day, he felt more in control of his future. One bright morning, while he was at work, a businessman arrived at the hotel. He was well-dressed and spoke with a confident tone. David greeted him in English as usual. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to our hotel. How can I help you?" The businessman smiled. "Good morning. I'm here for a business meeting. Do you speak English?" David nodded. "Yes, I speak English." The businessman seemed impressed. "I'm looking for someone who can help me with translation. I have a meeting later, and I need assistance with a few documents. Do you know anyone who can help?" David thought for a moment. His English was far from perfect, but he had learned enough to understand the basics. He spoke up confidently, "I can help. I know enough English to assist." The businessman raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you sure? I need someone who can understand business terms." David smiled and said, "I will try my best." The businessman looked at him carefully, then nodded. "All right, I'll give you a chance. Let's start with these papers." David carefully reviewed the documents. There were some words he didn't understand, but he used the skills he had learned to figure them out. With a lot of concentration, he translated the key points of the documents for the businessman. After the meeting, the businessman was pleased. "You did a good job, David. Your English may not be perfect, but you made it work. I'm impressed with your effort." David felt a wave of pride wash over him. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, an opportunity to prove himself and show that his hard work was paying off. As a result, the businessman offered David a freelance job translating documents for him. It was a small job at first, but it was a big step forward. David knew that this was just the beginning of even bigger opportunities. That night, as he walked home, David thought about how far he had come. From the boy who couldn't speak English to the young man with a job in translation, he had proven to himself that anything was possible with hard work and dedication. "I am ready for more," David whispered to the night sky. The world is full of opportunities. David's life had changed more than he could have ever imagined. The small steps he had taken to improve his English had opened doors to new opportunities. From working in the hotel to translating business documents, he had grown both professionally and personally. One day, Mr. Patel, the hotel manager, called David into his office. "David, you've done an excellent job here, and I have a new proposal for you," he said with a smile. David was curious. "What is it, sir?" "We are opening a new hotel in a different city, and I want you to be a part of the team that helps with the launch. Your English skills have really impressed me, and I believe you're ready for a bigger challenge," Mr. Patel said. David's heart raced. Moving to a new city meant new challenges, but it was also an incredible opportunity for growth. After thinking for a moment, David responded, "I will accept the challenge. I am ready to grow even more." Over the next few weeks, David worked hard to prepare for the move. He learned more about the hotel industry, improved his English even further, and packed his belongings. He was excited but nervous. On the day of his departure, David stood at the bus station, looking at the road ahead. He thought about his family, his village, and how far he had come. From a boy who could barely speak English to a young man with a bright future, he had achieved so much, but he knew there was more to accomplish. David smiled and whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." As the bus drove away, David looked out the window and imagined the future. He didn't know exactly where the journey would take him, but he knew one thing: with hard work, dedication, and the belief that he could achieve anything, the sky was the limit. David was ready for whatever came next. His story was just beginning.